Hi, everybody, and welcome to this first lecture on Python programming. We're going to be talking about Chapter 2, Input, Processing, and Output. And this is really about getting information from people, storing it in memory using variables, and then changing those values through operations, and then finally printing them out so that we can see stuff. The objectives of this lecture are we're going to talk about designing a program. There's a really good section in chapter 2 talking about this. They go into flow diagrams and things like that, which, that's a thing. It's a good mental model to think about, like, step by step, how do we do things? We're going to talk about how we print things to the screen. We're going to talk about writing comments in our Python code, to how do we use our variables, how we're going to get input from people and then use math and stuff to change those values. Because math is such a programming thing. We're going to format our output. The numbers, sometimes numbers get really long and stupid. So we need to hey, let's make it only like 2 decimals long instead of 300. And then finally, we're going to talk about magic numbers, which they call, I think, named constants or something, but this is a stupid name. Okay, so designing a program, I want you to think about this. In a Python program, there are really 2 things we do. We put values into memory, and then we do stuff with those values. That's really all we're doing. So we get information from a person because they type in their name, or we store, a well-known value like pi, 3.1415, blah, 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 into a variable, and then we use that for math operations. It's all about putting values, putting data into memory, and then doing operations on those. And those operations can include things like printing the values to the screen. That's an operation. So to write a Python program, open up Visual Studio Code, or any other text editor you've got. Create a text file with the .py extension. Type your Python instructions in there, right? Get variables, do stuff with them, all that other stuff. Save it and then run it. And that's how you write a program, okay? And we're gonna look and see how all of that works. So to print stuff, which means we display information to the person running the program, we use the print function like this right here, print function. And then we give it information for it to print. So if we say print and then this open parenthesis and then text inside quotation marks, hello, it's going to print out hello for us. If we give it more than one value, separated by commas, like this, comma, is, comma, fun, then it'll print out, this is fun. It'll print out each of these with spaces in between them. And we don't have to put all of the values on one row. So this is fun. You see, it's all on one line. In this case, I do this is, and then I go to the next line. Fun, look at that. So what is this print thing that I just showed you? Print is what's known as a built-in function. A function is something that you use to do something with. It does some sort of processing for you. And we'll talk more about functions in a later chapter, but we're going to be using a lot of built-in functions like print. So to use print, like I said, you type its name, print, and then you type a parenthesis, the open one, and then you type whatever data you want to print out, and then you type a close parenthesis. And that's it. And when you run it, it's going to print whatever data you told it to print. So what kind of data is there? Python actually has a whole lot of different types of built-in data, and we're going to be looking at a lot of them as we move through this class. But right now, today, for this next week, we're talking about numbers and text. Now, numbers come in 2 flavors. Specifically, integers. Python knows about integers, which are whole numbers, and it knows about decimals called floats. It's called a float because there's this thing called a floating point number specification, and so Python calls them floats, but we can think of them as decimal numbers, and that's 3.14. It's got that dot in there. We also have text, and in computer programming, we don't call it text, we call it string. And so when I say strings or text, it's the same thing, strings. So strings are text. In the previous slide here, this quotation mark with some letters and then a quotation mark, that's a string. So how do we print different kinds of data? We do exactly what we did before. We type the word print, that's the function name. We type the open parenthesis to say, hey, we're going to give you some data. Then we type the value we want to print. And then we type the close parenthesis. So in this case, I'm printing the integer 1. Okay, that's important. Here I'm printing the float value, the decimal number, 6.28. Here I'm printing the string text, printing the string, oh my. And then down here I'm printing the string 6.28. Now I want you to pay attention. This is the number 6.28, no quotation marks. This is the string 6.28 with question marks. And that's going to have an effect on what we're doing later today in this lecture. Strings and numbers aren't the same. See right here, I've already got a slide for it. Let's say you have this numeric value 6.28 and you have the value 6.28, the string with quotation marks around it. This first one is a number and the second one is a string. Not the same. Totally not the same. Okay, even though they may look the same to us pretty much, the computer's like, whoa, no, that's not the same at all. Now, how do we use variables? It's really important. A variable is just a name for memory. Remember, we're talking about a program. A program is putting things into memory and then doing stuff with it. And so we have variable names to make it easy for us to reference that memory. So in this case here, I've got a variable named name, like a person's name. And then I use this equal sign, which is called the assignment operator. And the assignment operator takes whatever's on the right-hand side of it and stores that value inside that memory, named by the variable. So in this case, I'm creating the variable name. I'm assigning the string nor to it. And so after this, whenever I look at the variable name, it's going to contain the value nor until I change it. The whole part of changing it is really important. If you put a value into a variable, like right here, I've got dollars is 2.75, and then I put another value into it, $99.95, that original 2.75, it's lost, it's gone. Variables can only point at one value. So our dollars points at 2.75, and if we set it again, if we do dollars equals 99.95, now it's going to contain 99.95 and not 2.75. That first value is gone unless you put it in another variable, because variables are all about memory. So how do we print values in a variable? We do it just like all of our print statements. So here we set nor, we assign the string nor to the variable name, and then we can do print, and we print the string hello, and then we print whatever value is inside name so that it comes out as hello, comma, and that's this string right here, hello, comma, and then nor, which is the name, the value inside that name variable. You can see down here, I've also got it on multiple lines. Hello, nor. Looking pretty good there, Curtis. Thank you. You can add two strings together, okay? You can add two strings, and it's called concatenation. Fancy word, concatenation. That means just taking two strings and putting them together to make a new string. That's really important. It's highlighted right here. Make a new string. So here I have a variable named article. And remember, that's just a place in memory. So inside that place in memory, I've stored the text the. And then I have a variable named noun, and I store the value dog in it. So when I add these two together, article plus dog, it creates a new string. It creates new text for me. The original article and the original noun, those variables, the values in those memories, not changed. I'm adding them together to get a new value. And I'm storing that inside phrase. And then when I print it out, I get the dog. Because the dog is THE and then DOG together. If I want to put a space between them when I add the two strings together, I just do that. Article plus a string that just has a space in it plus dog. And now phrase is the space dog. Again, when I'm adding these things together here, the original value article and the original value of noun, those don't change. Okay, because I'm adding them together to create a new value, which then gets stored inside another variable. Normal math with numbers, hopefully you remember addition, subtraction, division, and multiplication. It kind of looks like, addition and subtraction kind of look like what we normally remember, hopefully. Division, because we don't have like a nice bar with 2 dots over it or whatever, we use the slash, the single slash. That means division. So 1 divided by 3 is going to be that 0.0 forever, you know. And then multiplication uses the asterisk symbol. So 2 times 9.1, well, that's 18.2. Go away. There it is, 18.2. So it's mostly like high school math, except some of our symbols are different. Now, in programming, we also do some weird math. And by weird math, I really just mean math that we don't use in our normal everyday lives. Sometimes we have to do exponents, and I don't remember if you know exponents. 2 to the 3rd power. That means 2 times 2 times 2. That's 2 times itself 3 times. 2 to the 3rd power, and then you end up with 8. And then we also have some special kinds of division. This one down here with the double slash means integer division. And that's really just take whatever's over on this side, divide it by whatever's on this side, and then get rid of the decimal point. So 10 divided by 3 is 3.3333333, and so on. But then we just get rid of everything after the point, and we just get an integer back, the number 3. This is the weirdest one, modulo. And if you remember division, doing division maybe in grade school, where you were like, 10 divided by 3 is equal to 3 remainder 1. If you remember that kind of thing, that remainder 1, that's what modulo division gives us. It gives us what's left over after doing the division. So 10 divided by 3 is 3 remainder 1. And so modulo is remainder. And we use it a lot to be able to like test whether or not a number is even or odd. That's a really common use case of using modulo division. So can we add strings and numbers? We saw adding 2 numbers and we saw adding 2 strings. How about 3, the number, plus 3, the string? Well, Python will give us this error. It actually just throws up. It's like, no, I can't do that. I don't know what those are. And what it says here, unsupported operand. Remember, operand are the things that are being operated on, those values. Unsupported operand types for the plus operator. So it says, I can't use an int and a string. I can't use an int and a string with the plus. That's what this error message reads. And you might see something like this in your own program. Weirdly enough, you can multiply numbers and strings. And what it because Python's pretty fun that way. It makes it easy. So you can take whatever string you want and multiply it by a number, and then you will get a new string with the original string repeated that number of times. So Curtis times 3 or 3 times Curtis, either way, it's Curtis, Curtis, Curtis. I should have done bodies because then it would have been bodies, bodies, bodies. So when we want to get data from a person who's like running our program, usually us or your instructor, what you do is you use another function. We used print to print things out, and we're going to use the input function, aptly named, to get input from the person. And to do that, we type a variable name because input is going to give us what that person typed. So if they type their name into the program, we need to store that somewhere if we want to remember it. And how do we store it? How do we remember things in a program? We put them in memory. And how do we put them in memory? We use variables. So we use a variable name and then the assignment operator, that equals, and then the function name input, the open parenthesis, and then a string that tells the person what kind of information to type in, and then finally a closing parenthesis. Here's a little program. So it asks a person, what's your name? And that's going to be printed to the screen. It's going to show you what's your name. And then it stops. It just stops and waits for the person to type in their name and hit enter. When they hit enter, the value that they typed in, Curtis, type in Curtis, that's what gets stored into memory because we assign it using the assignment operator. Input gives us back that string. We assign it to name. And then we can use it. We can tell, buy some Fanta, Curtis. So one of the interesting things about the input function is you're always going to get a string. Even if you type in a number, if it's like, how old are you? And you type in 3, it's still going to come back as a string with 3 inside it. And remember, strings and numbers aren't the same. So if we want to make a number so we can do math with it, then we have to change it. We have to convert it into a number. Here's a program that does that. So first, we have our input function. It's going to run and it's going to print, how old are you? It's going to stop then. Somebody will type in a number, 23, because obviously that's how old I am. 23. And that number gets returned and stored into age, but it's not a number. It's a string. It's just text. It's just a quotation mark, 23, quotation mark. That's what's getting stored inside age. To turn it into a number, we use the int function. Int meaning integer. And then once we call this function, it takes the string value that was in age, or that is in age here, turns it into an integer, and that value returns that number. So now we have a proper number, 23, no quotation marks, just 23. And then we can do, next year you will be 23 plus 1, 24 years old. And so that's how we change our input from strings to numbers, or to integers, whole numbers, by using that int function. We can also use a single line. So I'm gonna show you this here. This gets really confusing. I don't personally program like this, even though I've been programming Python for a gazillion years. I don't like doing this because it's really confusing looking. I like doing it one step at a time. Get the input, convert it to an integer, do some math, print it out. But you'll see in the book, they're like, why not just do it all in one line? So let's take a look and see how this actually runs. Even though we have int first, that's not the first thing that runs. We look inside the parentheses first. So the input is the first thing that runs. It prints out, how old are you? It stops. You type in 23, hit enter. Now the string 23 replaces that. Then int works on that string 23 and then turns it into the number 23, and that gets stored in age. And then we can just do the same math that we did earlier. Again, you can type it this way if you want. I'm not a big fan of it because it's harder to read. In programming, really, here's a secret, everybody. When you program computers, when you write code, you're not really writing it for the computer, you're writing it for people. Because someday you'll have to come back and maybe change it. And you'll look at that line and you'll be like, oh, what's that mean again? Oh yeah, first the input, then the integer conversion, and then the number gets stored in age. You can also change a number to, or you can change a string to a decimal number. So I can ask, how long is something? How many centimeters is it? And, they type in whatever, 3.17. And then that's a string with, gets stored in length. So it's a string. I can't do any math with it yet. 3.17. So I want to turn that into a decimal number, and I use the float function to do that. Remember, a function is a name, an open parenthesis. What's there, an open parenthesis? Come on, just an open parenthesis. The data you want it to use, and a close parenthesis. So in this case, we're saying, hey, float function, here's a value. Here's a string, 3.17 string. I want you to turn it into a decimal number for me. And it does. And then that gets assigned to the length variable. So float string 3.17 turns into number 3.17. And then down here, we can finally do math with it. That length doubled is 3.17 times 2, which would be 6.34. Look at that. I did math in my head. Formatting numbers, sure, whatever. We don't really use this a lot, but while we're building these little command line applications, not big applications, when we're doing little command line applications like this, we're going to need to format our numbers. If you divide 1 by 3, you get the big thing again, 0.333. But you don't want all those threes. Like maybe you're printing out money or something. You're like, I really meant to do $1 divided by 3. Well, you don't have $0.3333333333 You'd have like $0.33, 33 cents. So you can format that value, 1 divided by 3. You can format it. And the first argument, the first data that we give it is the value we want to format. And then the second one is a string that tells us how we want to format it. Now this stuff here is like some weird arcane language that you have to like Go look at reference books for, because I never remember it. And I've been doing Python longer than a really long time. I've been doing Python longer than the MCU has existed. How's that? That's a good one. With that in mind, what this says is I want you to put a decimal point and then two numbers after the decimal point, and it's a float. That's what this means. Make sure you show me a decimal point. Only 2 numbers after the decimal point, make it a float. So 1 divided by 3 is 0.3333, but then we say decimal point only 2, and that's what we get here. All right, magic numbers. So the book calls these named constants, but that's a really bad name. It's a bad name because they're not constants. Other programming languages, they have things called constants. It's like a variable, but once you give it a value, you can never change it. Python is not that way. Everything's a variable when you assign it. Even though the book calls that a named constant, it's not a constant. I can change it in my program anytime I want. The way that they say, instead of like just making it look like a normal variable, we're going to make it all capital letters with underscores in between them. Tax underscore rate. Everybody will know that's a variable you're not supposed to change. I don't call them named constants. I call them magic numbers, because a magic number is a number that has meaning in your program. Like the tax rate for Texas here, 8.25%. That's 0.0825. That's a number that I want to assign to tax rate so that everybody knows that's tax rate. It's a magic number specifically for my program. And that's the introduction to Python programming. The next videos will show you how to actually do some problems using Python. Hope you've enjoyed this. Have a great day.